We are pressing on through the Old Testament in our study that we've entitled Thinking Through the Word. We're trying to take one chapter from each book and digest something of the theme by studying that chapter. Today we're in the book of Hosea, chapter 14. Hosea, one of only a couple of prophets from the northern tribes of Israel, he's prophesying from around the 750s to about the 700s, somewhere roughly in that time period. And right in the middle of that, 722, is the fall of the northern tribes of Israel. So Hosea is prophesying to a wicked nation about to be judged, and he's calling them to repentance. And so the great theme of Hosea is God's amazing love for this sinful people. And of course, Hosea's own life story, the testimony of his adulterous wife, is a vivid picture of Israel's unfaithfulness being swallowed up by God's faithfulness. So I want us to look at Hosea chapter 14 and see 8 key words that guide our thinking here. We begin in verse 1. Return, O Israel, to the Lord your God, for you have stumbled because of your iniquity. Take with you words and return to the Lord. I think you probably already heard the first key word. It's the word return. Return. Obviously, this would take on a New Testament sense of repentance. We turn from something, and here that would be from iniquity, and then to the Lord. So a returning, a repentance. And if you look back in the writings of Hosea, chapter 2, verse 7, chapter 3, verse 5, 6, 1, 7, 10, 12, 6, all repeating this call to return. Well, what's interesting is that in this return, we see the essential element of confession. Confession. Take with you words and return. So here's our second word, confession. Confession. And here's what it sounds like. Take away all iniquity, accept what is good, and we will pay with bulls the vows of our lips. Take away all iniquity. It's an acknowledgement that they are sinful and that they don't want this anymore. That leads us to our third word. We will pay with bulls the vows of our lips. Atonement. Atonement. And we could add through a sacrifice. Atonement through sacrifice. So a call to repentance. The script is given to them. Take words, and now here are the words quoted for them. Say this. This is what repentance would sound like. Confessing sin. Acknowledging the need for atonement to be made. And now we continue the quote, the very words they're told to say in verse 3, where there's clearly the turning from independence and from self-sufficiency. Assyria shall not save us. No more alliances. No more scheming. No more trusting in foreign powers. We will not ride on horses. We will say no more, our God. We won't say this to the work of our hands. This could imply both a rejection of their own power, their own sufficiency, but also would mean a turn from their idolatry. The idols we have made, we won't look at them and say, There is our God. It's the language of confession and repentance, and the language of trust in what God has said. And we see that here. In you, speaking of God, the orphan finds mercy. The one who has been outside becomes inside. And some of that is even found in the names of Hosea's children that are quoted in the New Testament. Those who were once without mercy have found mercy. And so here is our next word, moving through repentance, confession, atonement, and now our word mercy. Forgiveness awaits those who turn from sin. Verse 4 gives us our next word, healing. God's promise in response to their confession and repentance is, I will heal their apostasy. If you're watching this video, you could follow up with this week's sermon from 1 Timothy chapter 4, message on apostasy. God's promise is healing. He says, I will love them freely, for my anger has turned from them. And don't fail to link this anger turning from the atoning sacrifice. Connect them together. There's a reason. There is a valid justification for God's anger being turned away. But we have a few more words. As we come to verse 5, God says, I will be like the dew to Israel. I call this next word blessing. I know it's overused at times, but the reality is God is pouring out goodness. And that goodness is going to unfold in language to follow, but I want us to mark in our minds how this begins in verse 5. Whatever blessing unfolds in these coming verses begins with God saying, I will be. In other words, I will be to my people, to Israel. I will be like something. So whatever he says to follow is going to be these metaphoric expressions like this and like that and like this, like that. We're going to see a lot of liking in the sense of similarity, comparison. But remember, all that language comes back to God himself. God will be what his people need. So blessing is our word. And as it unfolds, I want you to see another word, the language of flourishing. The language of flourishing. The dew will produce a blossom like the lily. He shall take root like the trees of Lebanon. Shoots will spread out. Beauty like the olive. Fragrance like the Lebanon. They shall return and dwell beneath my shadow. Flourish like the grain. Blossom like the vine. Another flourishing term, like the wine of Lebanon. This language is the language of flourishing, very much in the agricultural language of the people. And that flourishing, remember, of verses 6, 7, and 8, begins with God saying, I will be. It's not the prosperity that is so refreshing. It is God who is refreshing. O Ephraim, that's Hosea's common name for Israel, what have I to do with idols? It is I who answer and look after you. I am like an evergreen cypress, From me comes your fruit. Mark verse 8 for your devotional thinking this week. God is beyond anything else that could crowd him out in our foolish minds. God answers you. God looks after you. God is faithful to you. God supplies all that you need. Final word from verse 9. Whoever is wise, who is that? Let him, who is it, understand these things. Everything that has been said in Hosea's writings, but especially here in this final chapter. So his message of rebellion and breaking covenant, you should see Israel's pattern and learn from that. You should see the horrible broken marriage that Hosea was in with his adulterous wife Gomer and learn from that. You should hear the call to repentance. You should see God's promises of mercy. You should come to know God as the source of blessing and flourishing. Whoever is wise, let him understand these things. Whoever is discerning, let him know them, these things. For the ways of the Lord are right, and the upright, that's who this person is, the upright walk in them, but transgressors stumble in them. So our final word is the word challenge. Challenge. Hosea's message is a wonderful story of God's mercy to sinners, a wonderful anchor to the faithful God for those of us who could only be unfaithful apart from him. And here's the challenge. Hear God. Know God. For the path of the upright is the path of life. Hosea, marvel at God's faithfulness to an unfaithful people. And remember, verse 8, from God comes your fruit. Allow him to pour out his blessing on you as you constantly live a life of repentance and confession, leaning continually on the provision of God's perfect sacrifice in Jesus Christ to forgive your sin, to bring healing and blessing to your life. Grace and peace to you for the week ahead.